So this is from CNN. Justice Anthony Kennedy, a longtime member of the Supreme Court and frequent swing vote, announced Wednesday that he will retire, giving President Donald Trump the chance to fill his seat. The opportunity will allow Trump to make a major, lasting mark on the nation's highest court by putting in place a second justice, after his choice to elevate Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court last year following the death of Justice Antonin Scalia in 2016. Trump, reacting to the news at the White House, said he had spoken with Kennedy earlier Wednesday and asked the outgoing justice about possible contenders to replace him. Trump said that he had a very deep discussion with Kennedy on his ideas. During his remarks, Trump pointed to a list of potential picks for the court that he had maintained during the campaign and updated last fall. Hi, I'm Michael Wan, your host for Michael Wan's Op-Ed Live, and this is LA County Assessor Jeffrey Prang, who is running for re-election this coming November. Our show, Op-Ed Live, is not about left or right, it's about what's right or wrong. So what's your take on this issue, Jeffrey?
Well, I'm sorry to see Justice Kennedy go. While I had very mixed thoughts on his views, there were many I was very enthusiastic about, many I was not. But he played a very important role. This court is split, and he was a swing vote.
Yes.
And it meant, from my perspective, it meant that the Supreme Court represented this nation.
Yeah.
Now it will not represent this nation. I believe that there is an opportunity here, something that will never happen, but what I think should happen. The Supreme Court has been so politicized in recent years. The Republicans blocked President Obama's nominee. There was an unprecedented level of interference in the executive authority. If the president really wants to bring Americans together, rather than appointing another arch conservative, he should appoint somebody who will play the role that Anthony Kennedy played, somebody who is a moderate, who both Democrats and Republicans can respect. I don't think that will happen, but I think in the best interest of the country, that's the best decision that could be made.
Okay, so Anthony Kennedy, he was appointed back in 1988 by Ronald Reagan, right?
That's correct.
So, but I think he was always a swing vote. Everybody always wondered if there was a Supreme Court case, they always wondered where is Anthony Kennedy going to do? He was never a one-sided guy. You agree, right? He was never a one-sided guy, especially on big issues, like landmark issues. Probably the smaller issues, I do think he leaned more conservative than liberal. So the marriage equality, the gay marriage issue, he was the ultimate decider that made it the law of the land,
He wrote
right?
the opinion.
He wrote the opinion, and also there were other issues. I think Obamacare. Obamacare was John Roberts, right?
Yeah, he voted with the conservative majority on the minority on the Obamacare.
Yeah, but he paled the way of I remember back in 2015. When there was a marriage equality issue, it wasn't about gay marriage, but it was a different. He opened that pathway, and then eventually, when there was a vote in California, the people voted against gay marriage, but the appeals court, the Ninth Appeals Court in San Francisco, they overturned it, and then you had this Christian nonprofit organization. They sued the Ninth Circuit Court, and then it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and then. It was exactly Anthony Kennedy who made who casted the vote, essentially making gay marriage the land of the law in the United States, right?
That's correct.
Right. So he played a major role in American history. I think he really changed the landscape in a big way. So I think he was very moderate. More of a libertarian, like you said. I think if you see him as a can't compare them to politicians, but I see him more as a libertarian. He kind of cared about people's personal lifestyle as what they may be, and he didn't want the federal government to intrude in those things. So I think he was a very much of a libertarian. I doubt President Trump will pick that kind of justice, though.
I doubt it as well. But I think that the country would be better off if he did.
It would be less controversial.
I think the challenge, and we've discussed this in the past, is that the politics are that the animosity in politics is so intense. We are always retreating to our corners, and everything is good versus evil, and black versus white. it would be nice if we could agree that we're going to appoint a justice who represents all of America.
I think it became more of that way because of President Trump's relationship with the media and the Democratic Party. It is so hostile.
Yeah.
You know that this is like almost like they just don't have weapons, but it's like an all-out war on a daily basis. Look at what happened in
Sure.
Red Hen restaurant. You know, they hated on President Trump's spokesperson, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and they kicked her out, right? They kicked her and her family's out. They went back home, and seven of Sarah Huckabee Sanders' family members or relatives went to the Red Hen restaurant in, was it Lexington, Virginia, right? Lexington, Virginia, I believe so.
That was Virginia.
So they kicked them out, and these five went to a different restaurant. And I heard that they even chased down, the owner of Red Hen chased down the other restaurant and told them to kick them out. So I don't know whether they actually ate there or not, and her dad, Mike Huckabee, came out in a radio interview and said, this is wrong. I mean, to be kicked out, probably that they could have taken it, but to chase them down all the way to a different restaurant and then to try to kick them down. But I'm just explaining the animosity between
Sure.
each other. And also, I think because of the unpredictability of Donald Trump, nobody thought that he would become president back in 2016. So I think they are still in the shock mode, the media and the Democratic Party. And I think Trump will not concede his position. He made a campaign promise that he would pick conservative justices, so I think that's going to happen.
If I may, the division in this country didn't begin under
Oh,
Donald
it
Trump.
began a long time ago. You're
I
right.
think that you could look at a different number of points of time, but I think it began in earnest, starting with Nixon. And we have,
Possible.
as the Democratic Party and the Republican parties in the 1970s and 80s begin to redefine themselves. And I think the advent of cable news and in the 90s with social media
I agree.
and the 24-hour news network and
It really changed the landscape.
It changed the way people think. It changed the way that they consume news and information. People are more divided. They're more likely to listen to the choir, whatever side that you're on. We saw unprecedented level of animus when Bill Clinton was president for the Republicans. We saw George Bush, where the Democrats were
tremendous
concerned.
hatred, yeah.
Obama, and Hillary Clinton,
Exactly,
the animus
yeah.
on the right was
mean,
palpable.
yeah, you're right.
And then with Trump, it's becoming exponentially worse, and it's unhealthy. And I think all of us as Americans need to start thinking about what is in the best interest of our nation, and recognize that part of deciding what the best interest of our nation is meaning that we're going to have to concede to people that we don't disagree with on some points in order to come up with a median where we can all live together without hating one another. Because right now we're on a path that makes me very nervous.
I think your analysis is just spot on. I mean, when you were talking about back in the 90s, I think it really started in the 90s. I heard that back in the 80s, Ronald Reagan still had like dinner with
That's correct.
Tip O'Neill, right?
Yes.
Every night, even though they disagreed in work, they would have drinks together and
Right.
talk about issues and off the record stuff. Hey, and sometimes they would make deals. Hey, we'll give you this. Can you give us that?
Right.
That kind of dealing. But it seems like I think starting from Bill Clinton, you pointed it really exactly right. I think talk radio started becoming popular in the conservative circuit.
Yes, that's
correct. And Rush Limbaugh the rise of Rush Limbaugh and the Conservative Party there. So I do think Bill Clinton still tried to compromise. When he didn't have the House,
Yeah.
he still compromised, and I think the impeachment thing kind of really hurt the relationship a lot too, regarding the Whitewater scandal. But it became all the way down to Monica Lewinsky issue, which wasn't the main issue in the beginning, right? It became that way, right, during the investigations, the special counsel investigation, and also in the 2000s, I vividly remember how George W. Bush was always attacked. They considered him, the media and the Democratic Party considered him like, they portrayed him like let's be honest, a less than intelligent person, right? And I think it really hurt him. And that also opened up Obama, and you saw the reaction of that Tea Party, the rise of the Tea Party, and then and then the both of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party became a little bit different, right? The Democratic Party, you saw the socialist, stars coming in, like Bernie Sanders, and we're going to talk in our next segment about that. But I think it is, the country's very divided, and it is kind of, I do worry what's going to happen later on.
What's interesting about the 1990s, and that's when, I think you're right, that's when a lot of the intense polarization began, probably with cable news, talk
too,
radio.
Exactly, yeah.
But
you have three cable news networks at that time. Right?
But Bill Clinton was not a liberal, and he actually was
moderate.
One of the reasons he was successful is because he tacked more toward the middle, which made him more successful.
Yes.
So it's interesting that even though he was moving more toward compromise positions, the conservatives doubled down, and they and still rejected him.
I think the Clintons was a moderate. I think Bill Clinton was a moderate. Right. I considered Hillary Clinton always a moderate, but I think she had to go more to the left because of the Bernie Sanders factor. But I think since President Trump, he also doesn't like the Democratic Party. I don't think they even talk. I'm not even sure whether they have after meal talk, or I can't imagine. I can't imagine him talking with. I do know that he used to be friends with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer when he used to be a donor. But now he's not a donor. He's their enemy, political enemy. So I'm not sure whether they have those off-the-record conversations. I can't imagine, right? I can't imagine it.
Well, I can't either, because he can be charming to you one day, but he does not allow you to, if you criticize his policies, he takes those personal and he comes after you with guns blazing. So it's really hard to have a relationship when the only way you can have a relationship with him is to always be nice and praise him.
Yeah, and okay, so if he chooses a conservative justice, President Trump, which is highly likely, then you would have 5 conservative justices against 4 liberal justices. But like we said before the show, Ruth Ginsburg, she's 85, right?
She's about 85.
She's 85. And then you have Stephen Breyer, who is 79 years old.
Right.
And many people were speculating back in the 2016 presidential election cycle that the next president will probably choose up to 3, 4, 5 justices, which might happen. We don't know, right? If Trump gets reelected, or if God forbid, if something happens to the other justices, then he might choose another one and another justice. And that would probably give a landslide on the Supreme Court side, all the way to the Republican side. What do you think about that?
No, I agree. If he appoints somebody in the same vein as Judge Gorsuch, Justice Gorsuch, then you're going to have a rock-ribbed conservative court, and there's all types of established judicial precedents, which will probably be in doubt, including things such as marriage equality, or a woman's right to choose, Roe versus Wade. All these things could be back on the table. The challenge is, as well, if the Democrats happen to take the Senate in November, they could do the same thing that the Republicans did, and just shut it down.
So I'm predicting this. Do you think the federal law would change like this and this? Before it wasn't like that, right? But now it became so political that, according to the justices, you can go swing back and forth like this.
Well, there is forgive me, I can't remember the legal term, but there is a legal theory about established law, that once it's been established by previous courts, you don't go back and revisit it each time the court make up changes. My sense is that's going to become less applied less frequently, and they may begin to unravel decisions that were made previously. What I think is, again, I want to talk about what I think is the best interest of this nation. So if the Democrats win in November, if the president appoints a conservative nominee, the Democrats are probably going to retaliate using the same tactic that Mitch McConnell did.
Yeah, and they would block all the other.
And I think that's unhealthy for the country. I think what President Trump needs to do is focus on making an appointment to represent the entire country and not simply his own personal philosophy. Let's begin to de-escalate this division between our country and bring people together in common cause. Otherwise, things are not going to get better.
So was it 2015 when Obama appointed the justice after Antonin Scalia passed away, right? He chose
He appointed Merrick Garland, who
Merrick
was a moderate.
Yeah, Merrick Garland, but he wasn't appointed because at that time the House and the Senate was controlled by the Republicans,
That's
so
correct.
he didn't have the 60 votes, so he couldn't even go nuclear option.
Right.
Which Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, did last year, right? That's
Yes.
how Neil Gorsuch was approved, and I think they're going to just have 51 votes, and probably it's going to go ahead like that. So it just became that way, right?
So it depends on when he appoints them and when the issue will come up for confirmation. I read in the LA Times today that Democrats will have some hope that there are two Republican women in the U.S. Senate, Lisa Murkowski from Alaska and Susan Collins from Maine, who both are adamant supporters of a woman's right to choose. There's a sense that they may be reluctant to appoint a judge who has a strong track record opposing a woman's right to choose, because they know that this could end up overturning this Roe versus Wade.
Yeah, and I saw yesterday's some TV shows like MSNBC, Chris Matthews, he said this is really an urgent situation. And some people were saying we might have to bring it down to the streets, and it seems like it's very emotional on both sides, but let's see what happens. So let's see who President Trump is going to pick. Okay, we move on to our next topic. This is what Slate reported today. On Tuesday night, 28-year-old Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez defeated the incumbent Democrat Joe Crowley in the primary race for New York's 14th congressional district. Ocasio-Cortez, whose election to the House in November is essentially a sure thing, was once an organizer for Bernie Sanders and has worked with the Democratic Socialists of America. And the article asked this question: how come young Democrats are so open to socialism? What say you, Jeffrey? And I wanted to know also the current state of Democratic Party as well.
So there's so much to talk about in this particular race. One of them is that this race, in many ways, reflects the rejection of the Clinton centrist model. That a lot of Democrats believe that Clinton took the party to the right, they began to moderate it, and lost track of core democratic values, which has made it very difficult for the party to win elections. So Mr. Crowley was the establishment, and his challenger was represented more traditional values. It is interesting to me that some Democrats are now starting to embrace the word socialism, democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders. The reason is in the past, Republicans have always compared socialists to being communists.
Something like that.
They used the Red Scare, the Cold War, to try to equate them, and that's the false equivalence. Socialism simply says that government has a role to play in certain elements of our society, as we do now under Social Security and Medicare. And a lot of Democrats are saying that the message that we need to get the working people in the Midwest and the people who are voting for Trump, to get them back, is to let them know that there are programs that will help improve their quality of life, to ensure that they have health care, to ensure that they have job benefits, to ensure that they have access to education, things that the Republicans have been really bad on.
When the Democratic Party, especially like Bernie Sanders, and she seems to be, Alexandria Cortez seems to be a Bernie-crat, when they say socialism, are they thinking more of a model of European model, or is it like Venezuela? It seems very vague.
So
I don't know what they're trying to say.
Bernie Sanders and Alexandria, these are capitalists. These are people who support the private production of goods and services. What they believe, and what a lot of Democrats believe, is that government has a role in ensuring that people have the basic needs for life: housing, medicine, education, and that there is a role for government to play to ensure that those are provided equitably and economically. And I think that's, if you listen to Bernie Sanders, that's his position. His position versus big corporations is corporations take advantage of their customers and of the people, and there's a role for government to equalize and to regulate them in order to prevent them from for lack of a better word, from screwing people.
Okay. You know, I agree on many of the things that Bernie Sanders said back in 2016 election cycle. You know, the rich getting the richer and the poor getting poorer, which is happening. And you see a lot of young people having a tough time getting jobs. It's not just happening here in the States. Even in South Korea, you see this jobless, you know, young college graduates. You know, so many of them happening in Korea. So I agree to a certain extent. You know, but I also don't know for sure whether federal government can really evenly share that wealth really well. Because I don't believe in the bureaucracy of the government. They waste so much money. I think, I do understand their point, you know, what the problem of this, you know, the rich getting richer, the disparity between the rich and the poor. But I have a tough time, you know, following their solution, you know, relying so much on federal government.
So their view is not to redistribute wealth. That's a talking point the Republicans
But Bernie
often
said that
use.
he wants to tax like 90% of the top 1%.
So what he's talking about is that wealthy people do not pay their fair share. They have access to tax breaks that are not available to you and I as working people.
Loopholes, right?
And so his view is that he who much is given, much is expected. And people who are benefiting from these programs, the wealthiest on Wall Street and major corporations, should be paying their fair share. The challenge is, even though wealthy people are getting wealthier, working people's wages have been stagnant for almost 30 years.
It is.
And even though unemployment's at a very low rate right now, people aren't making a lot of money. What his view is that major corporations like banks should be regulated so they can't screw people like Wells Fargo did. So they can't do things like the subprime mortgages, which banks knowingly gave out mortgages to people who couldn't afford it and destroyed the economy. And then we bailed them out, and they still gave themselves huge. That is inequitable. I think people recognize that's inequitable.
When we bailed them out, that's a little bit of socialism right there, right?
It was socialism.
If it's complete capitalism, we should have let them just burn down the bridges, right?
So can we talk about that for a second? Because there is enormous corporate socialism.
Yeah, corporate socialism.
The agricultural industry.
Like subsidies that we give to big corporations,
and,
right?
Subsidies we provide to oil and gas.
Why do we have to give them subsidies?
Don't.
I don't even understand that.
Those subsidies are remnants from the Great Depression of the 1930s. Those subsidies
But it's still intact. That's a problem.
And they were originally intended for small family farmers. Their view was, we're going to pay you, the small family farmer, not to raise so much corn because prices are so low. We're going to pay you not to grow it. Prices will go up. Income will go up. But then family farms are gone. It's now all major corporations, and they don't need those subsidies. And frankly, if we're going to subsidize, we shouldn't subsidize corn. We should subsidize healthy vegetables like lettuce and tomatoes and things to help people eat healthier, because vegetables are expensive in the stores.
So we were talking about the disparity between the wealthy and the poor. And I think Rust Belt kind of symbolizes that.
Yes.
Do you think the outsourcing issue is something that we can never solve, or I think, or do you, because you know that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump talked about this manufacturing issue, the outsourcing issue, that's why the rich is getting richer and the poor is getting poorer. I absolutely agree with them on that.
They're right.
Do you think we can solve this issue, or it's a gone issue? Like Obama said this is gone. You know that during one of his town hall meeting in Indiana, he said, you can't get those jobs back. He said to one of the constituents there.
He's, I hate to say that, but in some ways, he is right. We are now, every year, we become more of a global economy. We don't manufacture things here because they can be made much more efficiently and cheaply somewhere else. And that is so integrated to our economy now, to assume that suddenly we're going to recapture a steel industry and an automotive industry like it was in the 50s is simply unrealistic. And I think Trump, through his tariff policies, is trying to do that.
Which Bernie was trying to do is the same too, right?
He was, and I was sympathetic to what he was saying, but not necessarily to his plan, just like I am with Trump. The problem is Trump is going to cause prices to go up here. He may cost jobs here. To get a few jobs in one sector will cost jobs in another sector. All the people involved in the jobs of helping import and export will be impacted. Companies which may import certain pieces to produce here or to assemble here will be impacted.
Okay, so I have this question. You know, like Alexandria Cortez or Bernie Sanders, are they anti-globalist? Can we say that? Same as like Trump in a way? Because it seems
well,
like their business side, the economy side, sounds very familiar.
I actually don't know what she's said on those issues. I
Like
think
Bernie. I think she's pretty much a Bernie crowd.
But
So.
Bernie is.
He's anti-globalist, right?
So I think that's probably too strong of a term. I think his view is that, I think it's a rich versus poor. I think he decided that his view is that we've shipped a lot of jobs out of the country to make rich people richer. And we didn't take into consideration the poor, the working people here who are going to be impacted.
Yeah. They suffer big time.
I don't think he's anti-globalist for being anti-globalist's sake. I think he's for fair trade. And Donald Trump says that sometimes. He says fair trade as opposed to free trade.
Do you agree when Trump and Bernie Sanders said that other countries took advantage of America, and that's the reason why we have so much deficit? You know, I don't think America has any trade surplus regarding any most of the industrialized countries. If you compare America to other countries, it seems like they always lose money. Is that a big problem, or do you think that's something that we can't just?
I don't believe that other countries took advantage of us. I think we were taken advantage by corporate interest in this country. I think major corporations, major manufacturers pushed their major donors. They pushed members of Congress in previous administrations to accept these deals and basically to throw our own people under the bus.
How come we didn't have like some kind of safety equipment to block those trends?
Well, ideally, we elect people to go to Congress who are supposed to represent our interests. I think the challenge is coming back to money. There's so much corporate money in Congress. These people are oftentimes bought and sold by their donors, and they made deals with the people who keep them in office at the expense of the American people.
And I heard that it's a bad cycle.
It is a cycle. After
that, I heard that the corporations, some of them don't even want to give donor money, but if they don't, they get a backlash after if that candidate gets elected. So they don't want to get backlash. So that's why they give the donor money. Some of them complain about it.
And Trump has been pretty explicit about that in his statements about Harley-Davidson just in recent days, and about General Motors. He's come out and said
he's going to slap tariffs if you put factories out of country.
So you can't punish individual companies. You have to establish policies, but it once again demonstrates this sophomoric and unprincipled approach to foreign trade.
I think it's more of a marketing thing. You know, he knows that it gets news, and people probably in the Rust Belt, when they see that. When they hear the word tariff, I think they like it, and I think he's playing to his base in that sense. So, but I do think that essentially we have to do something about this outsourcing issue, right? Don't we have to do something about this?
This is a serious issue. People's lives and livelihood depend on this, and we have to stop the rhetoric. We have to stop playing to our base, and we have to come up with policies that make sense for this country. And the root at all this is money in politics and gerrymandering and the continual division of people into right and to left, that we cannot make good, principled, thoughtful decisions about what's best for trade policy.
Okay, so when you see Alexandria Cortez or Bernie Sanders, do you think it's a fringe group among the Democratic Party, or do you think it's becoming a bigger force than we think they are?
I think fringe is the wrong word. I think there's only two parties in this country. There's Democrats and Republicans, and within both parties you have people. In the Democratic Party, you have the Democratic Socialists, such as Bernie. On the Republican side, you got Tea Party. And they've always had that. Right now, what you're seeing in the Democratic Party is the people like Alexandria and Bernie who are saying, our voice, our values need to play a more important role in the platform of the party, and they're pushing. And they're pushing back because they're saying that the centrist policies of Bill Clinton and Obama are no longer working for us.
So I think it worked because it was New York, and we all know that New York is a very uber-liberal place. Do you think that message can be spread out nationally?
I don't know, but the one thing we do know in politics, politics is often, in people's opinions, is often compared to a pendulum. It swings this way, then swings this way. In the 1990s, the Democratic Party swung to the middle.
Yes, they did.
Now you have Bernie Sanders who wants to swing it back to the left. There is a strong movement within this country where those values are once again resonating, primarily because Trump is pushing so much in the opposite direction. People are finding that repulsive. Where it will land is it's still difficult to tell because Trump's whole way of doing things, his marketing, if you will, is so unusual. It's hard to really guess where people are going to go.
Okay, all right. Well, that's our show for today. Our show is not about left or right. It's about being right or wrong. To stay up to date with our latest videos, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking subscribe. Thanks for tuning in.